This week on Steve and Friends, we address a series of questions by Don Wilford. Don is a supporter of both Ty and Steve. Thanks for tuning in every week. Let's get started. He's best and the other project at first curve, right?
Yes.
He's best and the other project at first right?
Yes.
What a horrid noise. It's not like I put Justin Bieber on there. A bit slow? Well, maybe I am.
Self-deprecation from the man upstairs.
Well, what a put.
I mean,
funny. Okay.
Yeah, he's great. I mean, it's just he's shaping the entire show around something fun, and I love how he's leaned into the the self-deprecating humor, and this is going to be his signature move, right? Watch the breakout star Tyrone Keynes.
I think so.
Right? What do you think?
So.
What do you think, Steve?
Definitely. I mean, as it happens, I managed to eliminate from my vocabulary by something like about 10 years of professional debating. Not professional, but university and school debating competitions. And the first thing you learn is to cut the ums out. And that is what Ty has to learn as yet. It's amazing how that little vocalization just enters into so many people's minds. When they're composing a thought, the word comes out many times, or when they're feeling a bit shy, the word comes out, and it's one of those things which is common across all species, all cultures. So, like if you drop something on your foot, no matter which, you'll say "ouch." Okay, as you're a Swahili, English, Russian, you drop it, "ouch." So this must be a word that's so deep it predates words, and must be the same, a filler.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would agree with that.
Mm.
And I didn't even drop anything on my
points.
Yeah, I didn't even drop
too many arms. Well, let's get beyond the arms to the story. Yeah.
Okay. It's difficult now once it's been.
Once you realize you're doing it, it's impossible not to do it.
Exactly. Macro and cheese and Don Wilford. When I say those words, what comes to mind, Steve? Does it ring a bell? Don Wilford. What do you?
Not Don Wilford. Macro and cheese definitely with Steve Grumbine. So Steve and I've interacted quite a few times, and I very much appreciate the work Steve's doing to popularize modern monetary theory and to get on a range of contrarian guests as well. Don, I think I heard the name before, and I can't say that I'm sure right now. So fill me in on him.
Okay, he is a Patreon subscriber, and we wanted to frame the show like this. Our good friend, Tyrone Keynes, is going to drop in from time to time. He's on vacation, so he's got intermittent internet signal. Okay, so here's Don's comments from Facebook. I first learned of Tyrone from one of Steve Keen's posts about the work with Minsky to model the COVID pandemic. An extension of godly tables to incorporate various stages of the disease with all possibilities adding up to one. I was blown away, and believe Steve Keen was as well. Now, before you go into the blown away aspect, I'm the layman in the group here. I don't understand what converging to one is in this instance.
Oh, what he's saying is what he's referring to is that the godly table is fundamentally designed to handle financial flows. And one of the rules of financial flows is that assets minus liabilities minus equity equals zero. You have to make every time you do an entry in a accounting table, you make two entries, so it's double entry. And the row must sum so that assets minus liabilities minus equity equals zero. Now, what most accountants do, they use credit and debit. And trust me, I've had a look at that stuff, and I think, no wonder so many people fail doing an accounting course, because what you've got to give a credit to this and a debit to that, and there's got to be a credit and a debit on every line. So the rule they've made in terms of how you handle the accounting rules must be credit and debit on every line. And that's what guarantees your zero outcome. But then you have to record various things differently. So something as when you credit a debt, for example, you increase it. Okay. Now, what we've done instead is say we can do that as well. Minsky supports that. We also simply have plus and minus, and what you have to make sure is that if there's the sum must be zero, given the signs of the plus and minus as you enter. So if you're somebody's, for example, modeling lending, then the bank puts a positive amount of money, they call that credit, against the loan accounts. There's a plus on that line, and then also puts a positive amount of money in the deposit account of the borrower. There's a positive on that line, so you get two positives. Now, in accounting, it's like getting two credits, which you can't get. They make sure one credit, one debit. Our system, I think, is easy to understand, but it also means it makes perfect sense to say, well, let's model this where a population can be in one state or another, and the total state of the sum states to 100% of the population. So we start off with a pandemic. Before the disease, when the disease first occurs, there might be, say, a population might be 1 million people.
Mm-hmm.
999,999 are susceptible. One is exposed. And then as people become exposed to the virus, they either become infected or not infected. So that's another set of exclusive states. Then they can be recovered or they die. Another set of exclusive states. So you can use the same godly table structure for anything where the sum is 100% of the population. Now, that means you can't use it, for example, in a predator-prey model. I haven't actually tried that properly. It'd be curious to see whether you could make a predator-prey model with that. But I think there is nothing actually being, well, what's being conserved in a predator-prey model is actually quite a complex question. We'll talk about that some other session, but you're not conserving a population. If the sharks go down, the fish go up. There's no sum of sharks plus fish remaining constant. But if you're looking at a population of people being exposed to a virus, then the population remains constant. The population grows much more slowly than the people who are dying or getting infected the virus do. So you see with this constant population and varying states that people are in. And then it makes it possible to use the godly tables to generate, as Ty did, an incredibly complex set of interactions between whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated, under an age, over an age, whether you go from vaccinated to intensive care or vaccinated to healthy, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's an incredibly complicated thing to do, because each time you include an extra state in which your population can be, then you're adding another differential equation. And what happened with Ty's model, why it blew me away when I first saw it, 25 system states. Now, with any other software package, I think that'd be just impossible to keep track of. Minsky, it's quite straightforward. All you need is two entries in each row. They must sum zero. So what's increasing one is decreasing another. And it's very, very simple to lay the table out that way, and that's what Ty did. And then, as I've seen since then, a marvelous talent for laying out models. Yeah.
Yeah. Before I pass this off to Ty, I want to try and clarify a couple things. And one's the distinction between a typical debit credit model, as you introduced this discussion with accounting, and if I'm correct in understanding it, the difference. Let me know if this description makes sense. The difference is that we're talking about a system of multiple inputs. Okay, so basically, if you have a debit and a credit model, that is insufficient, because in your system dynamic software, you can bring in multiple inputs and you can have them go out in multiple outputs. Is that
not so much that? No, debit and credit are just. I'll show this. I'll bring up a godly table, and if I can just share my screen here, and it's actually one of a pandemic. So I'll just actually bring this up and show it on screen, and let's see if I can just do the
Welcome,
screen
Ty.
share.
Steve. Well, Steve does that. Ty, why don't you jump in and tell me about how the process was in creating that pandemic model specifically. That was really you had known Steve indirectly, and you'd worked on the COVID model, and then you introduced that to him, and that's what brought the two of you together, right? So, tell me about that time when you first decided to model the pandemic.
So obviously everybody's I'm a bit slow. Everybody was interested in COVID when it was happening. Steve had posted a small model on his Patreon that was quite interesting. I had been playing with Minsky for quite a few years at that point, so I downloaded it, played around with it, and realized I could add a lot more system states to bring some realism to it. I started looking at the data here in British Columbia, Canada, and just went from there. I had no desire to make a grand pandemic model, but I just kind of got a little bit deep into it. And
let's actually start shallow. Yeah, sorry.
And my wife was disappointed because I spent many, many hours making a pandemic model in Minsky.
You have a very tolerant wife, and the amount of time you must put into doing that in your spare time.
You should actually see us when we're together. She is very tolerable of me.
I can attest to that. Okay. She's wonderful. She's really, really wonderful. Yeah.
Look forward to meeting her. I'm just going to quickly show mine here so you can see. Can you see the screen at the moment?
I can see the screen.
Okay. So I've got population, 1 million. It's starting at 1 million. Then I've got
hold on, Steve. We're looking at your file structure or your bills. I don't know what that is.
Pardon me. I'm using the wrong one. I'll go across and sharing the wrong screen. Let's see. Screen number 2 or screen number 1. Hang on a second. Window. Let's say I do a window. That might be a better way to go about it. So can you see that now?
We absolutely can.
Okay. So this is, I've seen a lot of people saying, look at all the people who are dying who have, if COVID have been vaccinated. Obviously, the vaccination makes you more susceptible to the disease. And I thought, oh God, here we go again. Another piece of nonsense that all masked. So this is just imagining you have a population where COVID or some disease is prevalent. Population of 1 million people. You start with 1 million people unvaccinated. And then if you have vaccination, you pass from being unvaccinated to vaccinated. If you are a anti-vax person, you'll refuse the vaccine. So you go from being unvaccinated to being an anti-vaxxer. Then you can die with being vaccinated, and you can die as an anti-vaxxer or die as somebody who has a vaccine at all. So that's the basic way of setting up with the godly table. Now what I'm just going to do here is change across to debit and credit style. And you can see what happens with Minsky. This is now showing Minsky in the way that accountants put it up. Every row has a debit and a credit. So by debiting vaccination, I'm reducing the number, crediting vaccination over here. But if I, for example, had something over here, let's say I put in births. I'm going to type births as a new entry, so new people being born, because the pandemic is going on for so long. Then you're going to get a increase in the number being born. Now I think that'll credit. Let's see. No, it debits population, and I then type born here, and it will then credit unvaccinated. So this, what do you debit or credit? What one do you put there? Now, if you go across the way that we do it with Minsky, you simply say it's going to be just the sign, and born born increases population. You come out without the needle going in, so therefore you have a positive for unvaccinated as well as a positive for births.
Steve,
and
can
that's
I
the
ask
basic
a question
difference.
here? You're flipping back and forth between two that one of them has the debit and credit prefix. What was the rationale for that? Like, it was literally just to show how similar it is to an accounting debit credit framework?
No, it's really because Minsky, when Minsky began, I mean, the way that I came about inventing this is a long answer. I hope Don's interested in this. When I first invented Minsky, I'll actually stop sharing and go back to the just a moment. When I first invented it, I was trying to simply model money creation. I didn't understand double entry bookkeeping. I didn't even use it. I was using a table where there'd be entries, and it might be one entry on some rows, it might be three on another. And so this made it, a lot of stuff I didn't understand. In fact, I wrote the second edition of Debunking Economics after I'd worked out model money, but before I'd worked out double entry bookkeeping. Then once we did, I learned a couple of things. For example, I remember reading Graziani and Minsky saying that when a debt is repaid, money is destroyed. Now, my attitude was, once a bank has created money, it's not going to let it get destroyed. I wouldn't accept that. In fact, I was wrong. So destroyed can mean literally tearing up dollar notes, which sounds unrealistic, or it can mean taking them out of circulation. They go into the bank's vault because they're not circulating, they're not money. So that's what I modeled in Debunking Economics when I had that section to expand it to monetary dynamics in that second edition of my book. Since then, I realized the importance of double entry bookkeeping. I realized repaying it does destroy money. So I was wrong. And Minsky taught me that I was wrong. But then we had to get this idea of signs correct. Now, initially, we had a quirky convention of our own on the plus and minus keys. And then Russell, who's a PhD in physics and knows his mathematics extremely well, went in and investigated the accounting literature and saw we were being inconsistent how we're using debit and credit. And with that fixed up, we also changed how we treated plus and minus. And ever since then, it's been quite consistent. But I find the plus and minus much easier to work out than debit and credit. I'd suggest any accounting student who wants to have a cheat crib for the next time they've got to do an accounting exam, learn Minsky first. It's easy to lay out the tables and then just choose to go across from seeing things in plus and minus terms to seeing it with a debit and credit, and you'll get all the correct answers for your accounting exam.
Do you think Russell would want to come on the show? I'd love to ask him about his reformation of the system and audit, his math audit. That seems really fascinating to me. Yeah.
So that's we can definitely do that. Yeah. So what in the end now, Minsky as it stands, I think is quite straightforward to use his ties shown brilliantly with his own work on it. And it's correct in terms of accounting conventions, and it's a translation of those accounting conventions to simple plus and minuses, which I think is actually easy to understand in the accounting convention. Like, I'd like to see accountants adopt Minsky as a teaching tool and then slowly retire the debit and credit stuff. And it'd be, I think, a lot easier for non-accountants to read accounting documents. Mind you, that might go against the desires of the profession of accounting. A certain amount of mystique is always necessary to make yourself commercially chargeable. So maybe they won't do it. But that's where it came from. So who's keeping count of the ums? We need a double entry bookkeeping and ums.
I'm putting Ty on stage here. Ty, what do you think about this?
Yeah, just like, I have done a few videos. It's very difficult to, like, for instance, Steve has showed the banking godly table many times. And I did a demonstration with Vinsim recreating that. And it's very, very difficult to separate your assets and your liabilities. You're making negative numbers. and you're wiring pipes, flow pipes, to different stocks, and it becomes a spaghetti mess. I suggest anybody wants to really understand what we talk about, how convenient the Godly table is, check out my channel and look at Minsky versus Vincim. And you can see directly why it's so useful for mutually exclusive flows. And that kind of drags into the pandemic model. So the banking sector Godly table that Steve often shows might have, I don't know, 6 system states. And even that in Vincim becomes a bit of a cluster of mess, a spaghetti diagram. So when you move to something like my pandemic model, which has 25 system states, you can imagine the plate of spaghetti you get in Vincim, where I could utilize a spreadsheet, essentially, which a Godly table is, and have my system states, are you infected or are you in the hospital, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and then the flows going down on the horizontal. I don't think I could have conceptualized that, but to put it into practice in Vincim or Stella would have been very difficult, and I may have just given up. And at that point, I would have never met Steve on the old show. So, interestingly enough, Minsky brought Steve and I together. 100%,
Yeah.
and the easy use of the Godly table. In fact, looking back on it, I don't think I would have gotten into system dynamics without the Godly tables, because I often recommend to people what they should read, et cetera, to get into system dynamics. But I often leave out the point that really helped me was a simple spreadsheet diagram, which is the Godly table, obviously with your assets, liabilities equaling your equity. That's really what hooked me into what stocks and flows are. And then everything else, the behavioral equations, that came after. That's just about learning basic math. But just the idea that system dynamics is your stocks and the rates of change between the stocks. And those Godly tables are super intuitive. So that's kind of my story behind the Godly tables.
Great.
Excellent.
Great. That's a really good explanation. I want to throw a question.
Hold on.
That's a clip. That's a clip. That's going to show up.
You have 2 arms, but not yet one question. So let's work on the question.
Okay.
Oh God.
What is the minimal model to describe today's economy?
And that's a very good question. I saw that one from Don. Yeah. The basic answer is 3 system states. Okay. And this comes from my history of working with Hyman Minsky's work, but also complex systems. And I'll give a little anecdote there about another one of my great friends that I've met through working on Minsky, and that's Matteo Scriselli, who's professor of mathematics at Hamilton. What's the university called? Is it Hamilton University, or I've forgotten? Hamilton University, just outside Toronto. And he was with a high class. His PhD is in quantum mechanics, complex systems, quantum mechanics. His mathematics is off the scale compared to mine. So he got involved through my model of Hyman Minsky's financial instability hypothesis that I wrote back in 1995. I might actually, when we finish chatting, I'll bring it up on screen and we can show the paper. So that's my model. And when I wrote the paper, wrote my thesis, which was back in I bought the model in 92 and I finished my thesis in 98. So I covered the developments of people also attempting to model Minsky. And as it happens, every other model had only 2 system states. So discussing it with Mateus one day, I said, there's about 10 or so models of Hyman Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. He said, no, there isn't. There's only one, yours. Now, the reason he could say that is that you cannot illustrate what Minsky is trying to show with just 2 system states. And this is actually something out of complex systems. So a complex system, a dynamic system, A dynamic system involves changing values of stocks, which you can describe using a phase diagram depending on how many stocks you have. So if you have just a single stock, like for example, a population, all you can do is have one dimension, that's a straight line. You either go out to infinity, out to minus infinity, or you converge to zero, or some set value. Okay, so if you only have a single dimension, then your end destination has to be somewhere on the number line, and you can either fluctuate backwards and forwards, or stop at a particular point, or go to plus infinity, or go to minus infinity. Those are your choices. Now, when you include two system states, and let's take the example of a predator-prey model here. So you have sharks and fish. That's what I think in terms of predator being an Aussie. You guys might think in terms of what lynxes and rabbits, or foxes and rabbits. I'm not really sure what you have in Canada.
Bears.
Okay, so you have
moose and berry.
Moose and bears. Okay, there you go.
Berry.
So you have one on the vertical axis and one on the horizontal, and then what you have is a route. The model starts beginning of a particular set of initial conditions, and one of the rules of differential equations, which is more complicated than it is, a dynamic process starting with a particular set of initial conditions cannot intersect off. So you can continue repeating exactly the same dynamic all the time, but you can't have a course where you intersect and cross yourself. So in terms of how you represent that with a physical structure we can all think of, imagine putting your finger on the tabletop, and you have to follow a rule that says you can do whatever shapes you like on that tabletop, so long as you never intersect yourself. Now, there's only three real options that come out of that. You cycle in, converging towards an equilibrium. You cycle out, diverging away from the equilibrium, or you continue repeating exactly the same pattern. Those are your three choices. So that's very constrained in terms of the sort of dynamics. You can't get a breakdown, in other words. You can't have an outcome where it suddenly collapses to zero. Now, when you go to 3 dimensions, then you're doing exactly the same thing, but you're now inside a box. And the same rule applies. You move your finger anywhere in the box without intersecting your previous path, you can build all sorts of complicated patterns. So complexity comes out of 3 dimensions or more. And there's a classic paper in mathematics, which is called, and dimension 3 implies chaos. So the minimum number is therefore 3 system states. Now the question then is what system states? And it then comes down to what is your fundamental dimension as well. So when you look at the the model of Goodwin's model, which I used as the foundation for building my model of Minsky. Goodwin had 2 system states: the employment rate, which gave you a measure of how much economic activity there was, and the wages share of GDP. And since you only had 2 social classes in his models, capitalists and workers, what was the workers' share was giving you was effectively the distribution of income seen from the point of view of workers. So those are your 2 system states. Now, what you got out of it was permanently repeated cycles, exactly the same magnitude. And they are, I think, 2 or 3 fundamental dimensions of capitalism, but that's leaving out money. So when you bring money in, the form that money takes in a pure credit economy, fundamentally, is debt. So I included debt as the 3rd dimension, and then the debt I can show, and I can do this actually with godly tables in terms of a model of Minsky as well. The debt generates the money, and repaying the debt reduces the money, and so on. So those 3 system states, that's the essential minimum to describe a financial production income distribution model. And those are the absolute fundamental dynamics of capitalism. And when you go further, so this is actually, like, I've got a model involving government spending as well, and I've got other, tied in an incredibly complicated model as well, my basic Minsky idea. You might still stay with 3 system states, because even though, like what I had in the model in my 95 paper, I had government spending counteracting the destabilizing effect of private debt. But the government spending was based on the employment rate. So fundamentally, there were still 3 dimensions. But you need the minimum of 3. And to get the dynamics that I showed in that 95 paper, the 3 system states were the wages share of GDP, the employment rate, and the debt ratio. And they covered the essential dynamics and gave the potential for chaotic behavior.
All right, I'm going to get you guys to really put your philosophical hat on here, and this is a curve, a swerve. I want to ask both of you, what if we went a little bit more meta with those three containers? And from a standpoint of Immanuel Kant, what if we looked at time, space, and ethics? And you're gonna. I just need you to take a deep breath about that, because one of the hardest things that I have in terms of accepting the economic paradigm, right? Well, let's maybe look at Marx first. Is that through your own work, Steve, you've proven or pointed out that technology is an aspect that's not considered, properly in the Marxist framework, right? Also, energy. There seems to be these. There's energy, there's technology, there's labor, and it's all the models focus on one or the other. And I know that the software itself has this underlying time function, like it's graphed through time. But just, do you have, what comes to mind if I said to you, I would like to try a philosophical model that has time, space, and ethics? Like, how would you even wrap your head around trying to make those three constituents of maybe human experience, for example? Like, does this completely leave you godsmacked and just like dumbfounded? You just don't?
No. There is an answer, but it's a complicated answer, and that is that the fundamental dimension, as you mentioned, of the Minsky model is time. So we have labor as a function of time, wages share as a function of time, the debt level is a function of time. So those are three dimensions which themselves are dimensioned by time. Now, when you mention space, that is obviously another aspect of reality. It's one neoclassical economists can't get their heads around. I'm thinking about my dear friend Richard Toll on this front, who thinks he can assume space equals time and therefore eliminate global warming. It's nonsense like that. But when you do look at an object in space, it is changing both in time and location, and therefore the two dimensions of space and time. And that gets you what's called partial differential equations. Now, partial differential equations are a nightmare compared to ordinary differential equations, which only look at change through time and are themselves incredibly complicated. So the problem in terms of how you might simulate something, for example, if you're trying to do a model of the weather, then you have to take into account not just of time, but also space. Whereabouts are you on the planet? Now, what that means is if you're just modeling through the average weather for the planet through time, then you only have that one fundamental dimension, and you're leaving out temperature variations and rainfall variations on different locations on the planet. Now, partial differential equations make it incredibly hard to simulate an entire system. They make it easy in some ways as well, because if you divide the world into a whole lot of grids, imagine you make up the rectangles, say, a kilometer by 100 meters or 1,000 meters. They make them cubes. Then anything passing out of one cube is passing into another. So you get what are called boundary conditions for the entire system, and then boundary conditions for the small cells into which you break the entire system. Now, would that be a worthwhile thing to add to Minsky? Yeah, but the incredible increasing complexity of trying to model the system. So what I do instead is treat if I actually go to the stage of having a country and two countries, then you're teaching each country a point in space. And then if you have an export going from one to another, you might involve a time for it to actually go from one country to another, but start in one spot and stop in another. So an export at one place and that sort of gets you around. It has some of the same elements of treating space completely independent, but not as complicated as doing it that way. If you actually did it on the sort of, if we imagine like you could do a dimensional model of an economy in a sense. You could say, you don't need to worry about how high you are above ground. It's just that you're in a particular tree. So then if you did a kilometer by a kilometer, you might have 3 million or 5 million rectangles like that to describe the American economy. and then any sort of a sail from California to Idaho would be a movement through a number of rules to move that particular good. Now, do you gain by doing that? I think you do. If you want to model the weather, you absolutely have to do it that way, because you do need to know what's the weather going to be in California and affect over time the weather in Idaho. If you're modeling countries, you want to know how do the exports of America affect the imports of Canada. And in that case, you can actually treat them effectively as a single point. So that's what I'm doing with Minsky. I have this ambition that at some stage people might add the capacity to handle the partial differential equation dynamics to Minsky, and then include you'd have space as a dimension, but your space would be not in terms of geographical coordinates, but one other to be Canada and so on and so forth. So you could start. To me, at the moment, it's a particularly extension. It's better just to treat countries as individual points. If the transfers that way.
I'm imagining an exponential growth of multiple instances of Minsky all communicating, together in one supermodel. That those overlapping points would then allow for boundary conditions. But I mean, that may resonate with you or not. But I'm curious, and this is just, and then we'll get back to these questions here. Does your intuition?
It's one way about it. I mean, I am happy with the differential equation.
Okay, so we got an agreement. We got a bit of a lag, but let me continue the question. And this is focusing for Steve on his intuition of whether or not this is the pathway forward to make economics a predictive science as opposed to a discipline. What's your intuition on this?
I don't think it's an unnecessary at the moment additional step, because just so much that's wrong with economics already. Simply getting it properly is a hell of an improvement. So I'm happy just to start at the stage where I simply have there's my note, where we have the time being modeled, because economists don't handle time at all well. It's going to and show and share my model, share my screen. That's going to, let's see, this one. Screen number 2. I'm only seeing 2 of my screens so far. Let's see if this works. Okay, so can you currently see my screen showing a graph saying period 3 and
yeah, it's
right
just
screen.
There we go. We got some. Yep, we got it.
Okay, so what I've done here.
Do you want me to take this? Do you want me to take this comment down here, Steve?
I can't actually see the comment right.
Oh, you can't.
Go ahead. I can see the comment. Same box. I know. Watch Mandela is asking that one. Can't you go to the same point in the box? Isn't that saying you can never end up with the 3 variable? When you, with the 2 variable system, you can go back to the same spot all the time. So that's with the. If I run this model at the moment, I've got it on screen. I'll just actually start the simulation here and run it. And I've got it set up so it's actually 2-dimensional. So as you can see, it's repeating exactly the same pattern all the time. What I've done is I've set the lines at 0. But if let's actually a 3-dimensional, I hit the 3D here, and that's what you get. Now it's projecting itself, but there's actually a 3-dimensional object projected onto a 2-dimensional plane, like a cyclone pattern. And that is now giving chaotic dynamics that leads to the breakdown of the economy over time. So it is simply a rule that says that if you put it this way, if you did repeat the same, let's actually pause that while it's running at the moment. Okay. If you did repeat the same numbers once, then you'd need to be repeating the same numbers for the entire mix. Okay? You couldn't do it once and have it differing elsewhere. The entire phase space. So with the 2-dimensional version, then I repeat the same all the time. With a but I saw cycles in dimensions. With the three-dimensional one, I'm getting cycles in 3 dimensions. They can be far more complex than the dimension.
So it's kind of like that.
I hope that made sense.
I think so. It's kind of like that Heraclitus. You can never step in the same river twice in a three-dimensional system.
Yeah,
it's constantly changing, right? So
that's
interesting.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Ty,
so any more questions from Don? As usual.
Dawn, is Dawn the botched Mandela? Is that Dawn? Oh, sorry, no. That's okay.
No,
yeah, we have more questions from Dawn.
Yeah. Next question from Dawn.
Okay, so Hudson's latest book. So we're talking about Michael Hudson, right? Discusses industrial versus financial capitalism. The difference, as he understands it, is that the first is about investment for production, and the second is about investment for speculation. The first employs workers, and the second doesn't. It's not really a question, but is his interpretation in simplification is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, as far as workers, pardon, I meant banks. Very sensible to separate financial capital from industrial capital, and this is a trend you'll find in common and non-orthodox economics all the way back, so much as well. And you sort of just distinguish the financial sector, which is run by a bunch of more production and should be allowed to have nothing to do with it. Because occasionally the dynamics of finance mean that these idiots can interfere with the real economy in an absolutely dangerous way, and he was absolutely spot on. So one of the papers that, if you look back at the papers that the impact they've had, one of the most powerful in terms of people getting affected by my ideas was one I titled "The Roving Cavaliers of Credit," and that is Marx's way of describing people running the financial sector. So about what you do in a financial firm, product you're selling is debt. You're not producing it. You make debt by double entry bookkeeping. It's on the planet. Get the right to be a bank and you can create money. There's no production process in that sense involved. You don't need to get ingredients from somewhere else to make something. If you're running a factory, and Ty knows more about it than you and I do because he's actually managing one, then you've got to get the goods in. You've got to have the right machinery. You have to make the timing correct as things arrive at the right time to go through the factory and so on. So production and manufacturing in the industrial sector is a far more complicated task than finance. But the trouble is you can't get the production facilities built unless you get money. And then finance can dominate the whole thing. And we're in the world which is dominated much to its detriment by the financial sector.
Right. I want everybody who's interested and picked up on that term that I want to give 100% attribution to Professor Steve Keen on the roving cavaliers of credit. If you consult the Google Oracle and put that search term into Google, you will find that Steve Keen comes right to the top of the search results, which I find ironic is not the right term. I find it shocking that entry point into describing and equivocating the finance sector with something Marx had brought up. I find it odd that with so many Marxist scholars throughout academia that Steve's out on a limb with that. And go ahead, anybody listening, Google that. And Steve has that attribution according to the Google Oracle. So I don't want to lose our viewers here. We've got somebody by the name of, let's keep a faster pace on this, but we've got somebody by the name of Niels Raidmaker, okay? And he's got the following comment. Regarding involving ethics and strategy in a model, we didn't quite get into the ethics piece. A simulating agent populations through a collection of interacting system dynamic models. Those are basically themes he explored in his master's thesis. Is this what he's saying?
In my master's thesis?
No, probably in his. So he's just making a comment and say,
let's see. I didn't.
It's more of a comment, but how would you advise a master's student about trying to model ethical claims inside of the...
Niels is one of the Niels is one of the designers of Minsky these days, by the way. So somebody definitely got in dirty and coding Minsky there, which is great. Yes, interacting system dynamics with multi-agent is an interesting extension of what Minsky can do. Minsky is actually built on called Ecolab, which Standish built. He's marked for his PhD, his physics PhD, which is on a model of an evolutionary model of a predator-prey dynamic as a way of describing any variation through time. So multi-agent foundation to Minsky. We haven't tapped it, but it's sitting there. So it's quite feasible, for example, to build an overall system dynamics framework and then decide, well, some parts of it you want to have interacting agents determining what happens. And the classic instance there would be the stock market, bulls and bears. Now, you can't sort of model bulls and bears to system states interacting with each other and people passing from being a bull to a bear and so on. You could do it that way. But another way to go about it is to have the economic environment being by the income dynamic, and then have a stock market as part of the valuation of companies. And you could then have borrowing money to gamble in the stock market, others borrowing money to take short positions and so on. You could have the dynamics of the stock market, then system dynamics of the economy itself. So yes, it'd be possible to do it. You get ethical versus unethical people too. It's all quite a feasible way to go about it. I know there's a lot of people in multi-agent modeling, and I've supervised two very, very good PhDs in both cases on multi-agent modeling. But what I've found, and the reason that I don't promote it anywhere near as much as I promote system dynamics, is it takes an enormous amount of time to code a multi-agent model, even if you're using languages like Go, which are specifically designed for multi-agent simulation, and if you're quite a gifted programmer. You often find that the ambition somebody enters a multi-agent model with and what they've with from doing the PhD, the ambition is the outcome is productive, but not as complicated as they thought they'd be able to do. So this is because there's a huge computing overhead in getting it right. And we also, when you think about where we sit in the global system, we are all individual agents in a huge multi-agent system. But the information we get, the economy itself, is an aggregation current price level of stocks and so on. And so we're actually getting a system dynamics view of the economy, not the multi-agent. So we don't actually know what individual behavioral states correspond to the aggregate we see. So I think it's actually safer to work with the system dynamics approach, which is the correct level. And the other thing, agent, also about emergent properties, is that you cannot determine the properties of an aggregate, the entities of aggregate. So, for example, if I mixed something which freezes at minus 203 degrees Kelvin and something else, 207, minus 207 degrees Celsius, so a couple of degrees above absolute zero, and another thing which also freezes or becomes a liquid very close to absolute zero, what do I get? The answer is water, which freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. So hydrogen and oxygen together give you this substance called water, which is probably, in many ways, the most complex thing on, because water, H2O molecules, but they're in interaction with other H2O molecules depending upon temperature. It can fall as rain, it can fall as hay, it can fall as snow. There's so many forms that moisture can are quite crazy. The fact that water is I think virtually the only span that gets cold, most of them shrink. There's things about dynamics. So you cannot know that you can't know the property of H2O, knowing the properties of H2, H and O. The behavior of water is a classic property in a complex. Most people aren't conscious. People who work in the field, but most of them, their first example of behavior is a glass of water. What water will do. So then back to now the example, can we apply this in the economic level? What we see affecting the aggregate data is the level of a damn water level. Can't know that by knowing the state of individual molecules. It's often easier to work at the system level and then use your age level for stuff which is specifically pertaining to interactions, things like it's a stock market interactions of bulls and bears and so on.
Okay,
let's do another one of Don's questions.
Okay. As always, you realize your lack of understanding when you're unable to explain events. A recent example was the pension fund shock in the UK. It made me realize that I had no understanding of secondary bond markets.
Well, the secondary bond markets.
I didn't see the question up.
It's I'm just reading it. It's not.
Keep on
it's
going.
not a comment. Yeah. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay.
Okay.
More recently, he's read concerns that if too many reserves are created in banks, at the end of the day, won't need to clear so much central bank, will lose the ability to control interest rates if there's an excess of capital and of money creation.
No.
So I'll take that question. What's occurred now because of the excess reserves in the system is central banks are paying interest on the reserves because they've lost a bit of control on targeting interest rates because of the excessive reserves in the banking sector. So a new technique they're using is actually paying interest on reserves. It's at a lower rate than bonds per se. So the bank is still encouraged to go out and buy bonds with the reserves. So that is a problem that central banks have addressed by giving interest. There's at one point, many countries, the central bank did not pay interest on bonds or on reserves, pardon me. Now that's a common practice because the reserves in the banking sector are huge. If you look at the data, it's huge now. So, but it's at a lower rate than what bonds will pay, and central banks are. Central banks are.
We're losing a bit of you're cutting out, Ty.
I think it actually might be Steve's connection.
Yeah. I might dive in there if I can.
Sure.
How much you picking? Internet hassles. Okay. So the secondary bond market is the sale of bonds that banks or the primary dealers have purchased off the Treasury in the first instance, and then they're on-selling those to normally non-bank financial institutions, but sometimes individuals. So I've bought, at one stage in my life, I bought 200,000.
Well, he bought 200,000 and then he dropped off. So,
yeah,
maybe that's.
I was worried about my phone. Boy, it gives a great connection, far better than the resort I'm at right now. So it's working great. But I noticed Steve's connection is pretty terrible.
All right, I'm going to ask you this then. What is inflation in today's? It's today's key question. He's saying. It seems intuitive to everyone except for me and maybe mac and cheese listeners that increasing the interest rate will bring down inflation. I think it adds inflationary pressure. What are your thoughts?
It depends on the circumstance. The economy is not like one steady state. So right now we are facing supply constraints across the globe. So that is the inflation we are feeling now. It's not a demand inflation, if that answers the question. There's been other periods in time and circumstances where too much money has been printed and it's caused inflation. But right now, I actually got a really cool graph, and I wish I had it on me. It's showing in the UK that demand hasn't come up, like for consumption goods, back to pre-pandemic levels. Yet they're facing inflation there. So that tells me there's another issue in the system. And right now, if you look globally, those are still supply constraints and backlogs in the supply chain that is causing the initial inflation. Now, there could be a knock-on effect. So people are perceiving that there's going to be future inflation, and I'm not sure I buy into inflation expectations per se in every circumstance. But I think in the current climate, because people do know there are supply issues, they might be hiking their prices to help offset their future perceived costs. So there might be a little bit of that. But by far, right now, inflation is not because there's too much.
So I want to jump in because as Ty's got a bit of a freeze, and then maybe Steve can add in there. There was a thread of comments of factoring in speculation, and speculation can take many forms. So if, for example, in Ty's example, companies are speculating on the increase of costs and then adjusting their models accordingly, the same type of thing, or that's a different kind of speculation versus investment speculation, right? So what are your thoughts of trying to correctly or accurately model speculation, Steve?
Well, that's what you're seeing with the current inflationary dynamics. I think has got two major factors to it. Definitely not wage increases. Okay, wage increases still running below the rate of inflation, well below. It's markups by firms, and it's the cost of production itself. The cost of production has been made more expensive by the breakdown in supply chains, initially caused by COVID and also China's numerous lockdowns, because China is the world's factory these days. So that's meant it take longer to produce stuff, therefore it costs more to make it. But I think the main factor that enabled the inflation to occur was the monetary demand coming out of the stimulus packages to avoid a financial collapse because of COVID. That therefore meaning that people's cash availability for purchases of ordinary commodities rose dramatically. And when you look at the industry sectors which could still sell during the pandemic, no, it wasn't services anymore. Transportation, overseas air flights, cruises and stuff like that disappeared as a potential source of revenue. So you switched across a lot of physical commodities and delivery goods and so on. That meant that in each industry segment where people are selling boxes to consumers, the perceived level of competition they were facing from their competitors declined. In other words, because there was so much monetary demand, for example, for the new cars, then new car sellers found that they didn't appear to be losing customers to other producers of new cars. There were so many customers. What that means is you have less need, or you feel less need, to restrain your markup. So there's lots of demand for your cars. One way you're compensated by that is putting up your markup, particularly if your costs are rising as well. So that appears to be what's happened to cause this huge burst of inflation we're going through right now, both an increase in the cost of supply, huge capacity for extra demand courtesy of the fiscal stimulus that we had, and that translating into lower perceived competition between capitalists in each industry segment. Therefore, they felt easier in putting up their markups than they would have done at any other time. So we actually have markup-driven inflation and supply-driven inflation, not wage-push inflation as we saw back in the 70s.
So I want to catch on something you said. Did you mention something about fiscal stimulus? Like, I mean, am I like the government's actually giving population a helping hand? Is that what you were referring to? Actually,
indeed, I was. And if you take
perceptionary, like the perception of inflation, and that was what's driving inflation, because I thought that was completely wrong.
No, it's what's turning up on the. I mean, it's a feasible explanation for the fact that this is the shortest recession in economic history. So I'll do one more screen share once I get my data downloaded. The St. Louis Fred database, I think, is an excellent database of economic statistics. And one thing they do on every chart is they include the, pardon me doing an again, they include the recession is shown in every chart, which is the grey bar that comes down. Now, if you take a look at the length of the recession for the great global financial crisis back in 2008, that was an extremely broad bar. It was a very, very long lasting recession. When you look at the recession for COVID, it's just basically almost a vertical line. It doesn't have any depth to it. So I'm just going to just bring this up on screen and show this so you can see what I'm talking about. Just give me a moment to come back to our studio and do the share once more. So I'll share. I hope I'm choosing the right. Oh no, I'm not choosing the right one here. I hope this is the correct screen.
Nope.
It's not. Are you seeing my screen or not?
I see it in the background, and it's a paintbrush stroke.
Okay, we've got to change that. So I'll stop sharing. Pardon me. This has been a bit of a pain here. I'll try sharing again. I'll share a window. That might be a better way to go about it. I'm trying to choose the right window. Entire screen. Damn. Not a godly table, not that one. Sorry about this. It should be straightforward. I'm choosing to share this entire screen. It's only showing me 2 screens, and I've got 3, which is a bit of a problem. Live Studio, Ravel, Minsky Search, Tableau, Godly. I'll try that one. And it's not, you're seeing my diary there, which is not what I wanted to share. Let's see if I can find what that got to. Okay.
Is this it? I can.
This. Can you now see the graph of unemployment rates?
Yes.
Good. Okay. The grey bars are the length of each recession. So that's the October 81.
Wait. This is vaccinated with border. Is this unemployment?
Oh, pardon me. Bloody hell. Sorry about this. I'm making a bit of a stuff up here. That's just it's not the one I wanted to show. I'm trying to show this one, which is the unemployment rate for America since 1946. Are you seeing that or not?
You just have to.
Pain.
No,
I've got to see if I've got written it now. I'll see if I can come back to it. This is having multiple windows open and things just not working properly. So, hang on. Okay, I'll try on Edge as well, which I've got to use Edge to see any charts here. So just give me a second to get this working properly.
You take your time, and I want to throw something out for the audience, and as well as Steve and Tyrone. There's a lot of really good questions here on this in this episode, and I think I'd like to continue this into the first episode in January, because as we come back next week, this is the first of 2 episodes that I believe we're going to be taking off, because we're going to be too close to Christmas. Then there's going to be a week off for New Year's, and we're going to come back in in January. And I'd like to bring up this because we're a full hour into this, and there's still a lot of good stuff. I don't like rushing through things at all.
Yeah.
So
can you see a chart now? Just going to check. Can you see a chart on screen, please?
There we go.
Okay, good. Now, what I want to point out, the reason I did make that long-winded statement, this is the length of the tiny little grey bit here is the length of the COVID recession. It was huge. Unemployment beats up to, it peaked at 14.5%, 15%, highest rate of unemployment in the post-war period. But it lasted a trivial amount of time. Now, what's the difference between this recession and this recession? During this recession, they gave money to the banks. During this recession, they gave money to the people.
Can we see your mouse?
Oh, sorry.
There it is. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Wrong screen. But there's the duration of the Great Recession was the longest in post-war period. And that's when Obama followed the advice of people like Ben Bernanke and gave money to increase reserves. That was QE, increasing reserves of the banks. They believed that would lead to a faster recovery than if they gave it to the public. And Obama literally said that too. He swallowed their their snake oil. Now, when you look at it, that's when they gave money to the banks. This is when they gave money to the public. Which one was shorter? So, okay, so back to you, Dan. So we carry on with this one in two shows' time.
Yeah, that brings up the point, though. It brings up my point. This is driving inflation, that we gave money to the public?
I think it is, because it gave the public more money to spend. Now, what it didn't mean that the public, some people, when they got the benefits through COVID, were getting more through the government than they got for their own wage. You're looking at American in particular. This is American data, obviously. But the state of American workers is so bad these days that the fiscal stimulus, the $1,000 that people got given earlier and so on, put more money in people's bank accounts than they'd had for ages. And then if people are spending based on the amount of money in their bank accounts, then that boosted spending. And that then meant that the perceived demand for firms for supplying consumer goods was so great that they felt they could be relaxed about their markups. With an increase in cost, they put up their costs and they put up their markups as well. And out of that, we've got inflation rather than coming from wages. Now, wages at the same time are below the rate of inflation.
Yeah, then I'm going to say not all inflation is created equally, and maybe that's a welcomed inflation.
Yeah.
You look at how this translates through time, and one has an ideological tinge to it to say, you know what, stay out of everything related to universal basic income, and it just basically proves the point for the entire reality of a conservative position, to say back to work, more production, yay, this is the way out of economic woes. I think there's a lot more that we can dig into this, and Tyrone is out of the picture here just for a minute. Here's my proposal to the three of you. We're going to wrap this up. It's already 10 after, or almost 10 after. We're almost 10 minutes over. Next week, we're not going to be on because we're too close to Christmas. The following week, we're going to be too close to New Year's. And Steve is a party animal. I've seen him party. Actually, I haven't, but I can imagine he's just going to rip it up with his friends and family. He's going to have a great time. He's going to relax. He can take some time off. I know I'm looking forward to the break, and I hope everybody listening also takes a well-rested break. We're going to be back in the new year, and my proposal for the two of you, I want a yay or a nay, is to bring up this again. We're going to circle back to Don's comments. We're going to bring this back in. I didn't want to rush through this episode. I think there's still a lot of good things that we can dig into here on this mac and cheese episode. So yay, nay, what do you think, guys?
Yep.
Okay, good.
Thumbs up from me.
All right. So
all right.
Everybody, we're going to take, this is it. And we're going to see you all next year. I've got a nice little intro. Like, subscribe, and we're back in January.
See you then. Okay, bye, guys. No longer live?
We did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it, so fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning.